Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. This video is going to be all about Alberta, Canada. If that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. I had this weird experience in rural Alberta in 2012. It was in April, I believe. I was on a road that I know quite well, but the road has a reputation among some locals for being haunted or having stuff wrong with it, quotes. Sometimes people see things or people walking on the road that don't seem to actually be there. But anyway, as I said, it's very late at night. I'm driving down this road that I know well. I see a large black shape in the ditch up ahead. I step on the brakes, believing it's a moose. As I get closer, I notice that there's a lot more than one. There's 7 to 8 large black shapes in the ditch. Now, moose don't exactly travel in big groups, so I think maybe it could be a bunch of escaped cows. But they all look tall, too tall to be cows. Even with my headlights, I can't seem to puncture the blackness. There's nothing more than pitch black shapes, not even any eyes reflecting off them. I slowed to a crawl and pass them by. None of them move an inch. I leave them behind, not quite sure what they were, but not feeling brave enough to stop and try to find out. Before I speed up, I look in my rearview mirror. In the little bit of light coming back from my brake lights, I can see that 2 of them are now up on the road. They seem to be coming toward me, but I can't really make out any legs or arms. I just know that they're moving, and the way they moved was so unlike anything I've ever seen. It was almost like that everything was bending around it as it was moving. I just got the hell out of there, to be honest. It was too eerie for my liking, and it was the only time I've ever seen anything like that. I've been down that road hundreds of times in my life, both in the daylight and both at night. I'm not going to completely dismiss the idea that it could have been something normal, something mundane, but I don't know. The way it moved, it didn't really seem like anything normal. This is something that happened when I was 12 or 13. I'm not entirely sure. But I was in Scouts at the time. This is Scouts Canada, in Alberta. We were out in Kananaskis, pretty much right up near the mountains. During this camping trip, instead of staying in tents, we were staying in small wooden cabins. All of them were pretty far away from each other, and they were almost all right in the forest. The surrounding area is nothing but forest, and it's dark as hell as well. So being the absolute dumbest 12 or 13-year-olds that we were, the 4 of us from our cabin decided to take our propane lantern and go sneak around the forest and explore. We walk along this boardwalk area that led to the main bonfire area. We go past that and deeper into the woods. After a while, we all kind of get freaked out and decide that we should head back to our cabin. But 15 minutes later, heading in a random direction, we realize that we're lost. Very lost. By this time, we're starting to panic a little bit, and we're getting even more turned around in the process. And then suddenly, we hear something in the trees. At first, I thought I was just imagining things, so I tell the rest of my friends to be quiet for a second. We wait in silence for only a few seconds, and then we hear it again. This time, I'm definitely sure that something else is out there with us. We hear rustling in the undergrowth and the breaking of twigs. It doesn't sound at all like the way a person would walk through the forest, especially someone searching for us. We're all standing there, petrified. Fight or flight hasn't quite kicked in yet. Then the noises start to get closer, and it breaks through some trees that were about 15 to 20 feet ahead of us. All we see are a pair of essentially glowing eyes, too high off the ground to be a deer or anything, glinting off the light of the lantern. They jump out of the trees and then go low to the ground as if it's stalking us, and then stands up straight, again, too high to be a deer or really any normal animal. David is the first to react. He ends up dropping the lantern. It smashes on the ground, and there goes our only light source besides the moon. We all run like none of us have ran before in some random direction, and whatever this is takes off after us. It seems to be gliding almost from tree to tree. It never screams or makes a call. Just in some instances we can hear it in the brush. We can hear it up a tree, and when the moon is bright, we can see its eyes glint behind us. None of us have any idea what it is, or none of us want to find out either. We run or speed walk for what feels like half an hour, and we end up making it to the highway. We end up having to walk down the highway to find the entrance to our camp. We find the way back to our cabin in the dark somehow. I don't remember at what point the thing either gave up or just left us alone and decided that we weren't worth it, but it happened at some point between the woods and the highway. We got back to our cabin. We blocked it off with one of the bunk beds and had absolutely no sleep that night. We told a bunch of people, but nobody believed us, of course. It was probably the scariest time of my life, running through the dark forest, feeling like you're being hunted. These next two are interesting because they take place a year apart and from different people, but they could be talking about the same thing. What do you think? So I have a pretty spooky story. I'm an oil field medic in northern Alberta, and I was working night shift in the middle of the Canadian wilderness. I sit at the very edge of the work site, and there was only 2 other people on site. So I'm sitting in my MTC, Mobile Treatment Center, watching for wildlife, because we had quite a few reports from the day shift about wolves and cougars in the area. So I'm scanning the tree line when I see some movement. I was only 30 feet from the tree line, so I took a little closer look. It looked humanoid, so I rolled down my window and I called to it, thinking that it was someone possibly lost in the woods who needed help. I didn't get any response, but it turned and waved at me. I got chills down my spine for some reason. I ended up rolling my window up and driving over to the other 2 guys on site. I told them what I saw. Of course, they didn't believe me and laughed me off, so I pointed to where I saw it. It was now standing right where my truck was, about 100 feet from where I am currently parked, looking at us with the widest grin on his face. I felt the color drain from my face. We dropped everything and jumped in my truck and left the site as fast as I could go. Thinking back on it, we were a good 80 kilometers from any active site, or anything for that matter, so I don't know why I thought someone was lost in the middle of the woods during the winter. And this is the second one. I was working in far northern Alberta. This area is a huge-ass forest, and the only signs of civilization are oil and gas wells and plants. It's all muskeg in the forest area. Muskeg is scary just by itself. It's literally soft ground from decaying stuff in the forest that has grass growing on top. It can be immensely deep. It's water, rotting plants and animals, but thick enough for grass to grow on it, and some small trees to even take root. It's basically Alberta's quicksand. Moose are known to venture into this and get stuck and then drown. In areas like this, some of the wells can only be visited by most vehicles in the winter. Some are even more remote and can only be accessed by helicopter, even in the winter. So I had picked up a pretty sweet job on one of the helicopter runs. I was doing maintenance, and I did it for 2 years. And I want to stress though, these locations are 300 to 400 kilometers away from any real civilization that's not other planets. And traveling in these areas in general is extremely dangerous, not only because of animals, but again, stuff like muskeg. So one summer, my pilot lands down. As we land, a guy exits the little shack that was set up on site. He looks normal enough. He looks a little tattered though, kind of rough, but looks genuinely like a normal human. He has fairly straight cut, short black hair. He has a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow as well. He's wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt that is 2 or 3 sizes too large, and regular blue jeans. He's going toward the tree line. I yell out to him something like, "Hey, what are you doing here? We can help you get home." He keeps going. I yell out again, "What the hell, man? How did you get out here? We can help you." The pilot even says something like, "We can cancel our run and get you to safety." He makes it to the tree line while we are yelling. He stops. He looks back. His face kind of droops or slips into a smile. He then runs into the trees and disappears. No one at work believed us, but it always stuck with me. I don't know if it's really paranormal, but it's truly the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. I would like to know what the hell was going on out there. So do you think that possibly these two encounters a year apart could be about the same thing? Let me know. I live around central Alberta, north of Calgary, but south of Edmonton, and a bit closer to Red Deer. I was with a few buddies. We were exploring some abandoned houses. We were going down back roads, old highways, anywhere that we could find deserted houses. We packed food, water, toilet paper, flashlights, and other things that we figured that we might need. The first few houses weren't that creepy or anything special at all. Just a deserted house that's been covered in graffiti, had garbage laying around everywhere, and smelled disgusting. Finally, we made it to this one house, and every entrance was boarded up except for one window. The window led into the basement, which was covered in water. However, since this was in winter, the water was frozen. We decided to toss a few large rocks onto the ice to see how thick it was. Finally, we agreed it would be safe enough to hold us. We climbed down the window onto the ice and turned our flashlights on. The place was pretty creepy. Not much was going on in the basement though, so we ventured up the staircase. For some reason, when I got to the top, I was getting a little freaked out, which is strange for me. I normally love that feeling of fear, but this was more. It felt like that I was in danger, like I needed to get out. I was with my friends though, and I didn't want to bitch out. I was in the lead, and we went up the stairs. I remember trying to make a joke to calm myself down, so I shouted, "Honey, I'm home," which my friends didn't find funny at all and told me to shut the hell up, and now I realize that it wasn't that funny either. We made it to the first floor, and this house was strange. Now, exploring abandoned houses, you get used to what an abandoned house is like. If you've been in some, you'd know what it's like too. Garbage, busted up furniture, if there is any, and a foul stench left from years of rotting. So when I say this house is strange, it's because it wasn't like a normal abandoned house. The outside showed it completely though. Graffiti, every window and door was boarded up, except of course the one that we went in. Garbage was laying everywhere, but the inside, not a touch of graffiti was there. But the furniture The furniture was laying upside down in the corner with no marks on them. They were all stacked in a cube shape, so I couldn't see what was behind them, but there wasn't a scratch on them. However, there was still the garbage and foul stench that you get from other abandoned houses, but this was different too. The garbage was all the same garbage. It was tons and tons of packages of meat. The stench was horrible too. So a side note, in science class, I smelled ammonia straight instead of wafting it into my nose. It was a terrible decision. Never do that. But the stench was almost that bad. When I got close to the couches, it flooded my nose. I assumed nothing was there, and we headed upstairs. When we got upstairs, there wasn't much to look at. A few dolls were laying around, with tears in them, a lot of paper that we didn't bother to read. Sometimes we like to bring stuff back that looked neat, and paper isn't that neat. Finally, my buddy wanted to leave. He said that he's not having a good feeling about this place, so we started downstairs. As soon as we were heading into the basement, we heard the most terrifying sound that I've ever heard. "Honey, I'm home." It sounded like my voice. There were other things it said too, things that I said while talking to my friends. It sounded just like me. I have a lisp when I talk, and this voice had a lisp that sounded just like mine. I freaked out, much more than my friends did. I just burst into the basement, right out the window, and into the car. I started the engine and shouted at my friends to hurry. As soon as they got in the car, before they even had time to close the doors, I drove off. Now, I'm a Native American, but I've never really paid attention to anything to do with it. I don't really do anything related to my culture or tribe, and I never really got into spiritual stuff either. But I told my mother this story, and she told me to talk to my grandmother about it. My grandmother is old. She grew up in the Northwest Territories, and had told me that what I encountered was, I forgot the native name, but basically in English, the imposter, a story that dates back years and years. It was the first time I had ever heard of these creatures, and the last time I ever want to hear them. So this is basically the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me during my time with the RCAF, Royal Canadian Air Force. This is my first time telling anybody about what happened, so I'll try and take out most of the military lingo. So first of all, I wanted to be in the army in general because I'm quite patriotic about my province and my country. I went to uni first because, I'm not going to go anywhere without a degree. Me and my friend wanted to join together. I tell him to get a degree so we actually have a future after the army. He goes to college and becomes a welder. I go to university and I get my degree. Anyways, of course he finishes before me, so he joins up and is working about a year before I am training. After all this though, we get deployed into northern Alberta. The base is snowy and cold as hell during basically 24/7, 365 winter. We both work with helis because my friend loved them. So one day, we get told to fly out at around 10 a.m. I didn't want to, but I wasn't exactly in the position where I could say no. So, I get in the heli with my friend, and I learn that where we're supposed to go is about 15 to 20 clicks out. Neither of us got told what exactly happened, but since they needed the heli, we assumed it was a hunting accident, since there's no grocery store for hundreds of kilometers. We ride in silence for the most part, because we're pretty tired, because we're also the crew doing supply runs. So we finally get out to the coordinates, but it's still pitch black out. I use the night goggles, and I see this house, but while I'm looking at this house, Something isn't right. The front door is open and all the lights are off. Just staring at it, I get this horrible feeling. I tell my friend to pull up so we can be quick about this. He asks why. I tell him to just pull up. He sighs, but pulls up. I stare at the house for what feels like forever, waiting for something to happen. I was just about to say, let's go down and check it out, when something comes out of the house. Note, something. This thing literally ducks away to get out of the doorway. It 100% looks to be dragging a person behind it. It has such a disproportionate body, a large head with a smaller body with long arms and long legs. It suddenly stops and looks up. It's looking at the helicopter like, what the hell is this? But I can almost feel that it's staring directly at me as well. I get really creeped out. I tell my friend that we need to have a look. He spins around and looks down and says all he sees is a guy on the ground. I look around and I think, where the hell did that thing go? But we see him moving, and my friend says we have to go get him. I tell him that there was something else down there, but he doesn't believe me. I get a little pissed because I'm not being believed, but I can't fight him because he's flying. I tell him not to power down at least, and hover so we can take off faster. He rolls his eyes, but he can see that I'm being deadly serious. I get down there, and I basically become an Olympic runner. I grab the guy and throw him on my shoulders, and basically run back to the heli. I was quite strong because of the army. I toss him on the floor, and I step up, when suddenly, over the noises of the helicopter, we hear a screech that would beat out any animal by a mile. I turn to see this thing that I saw on the roof. I freak out and I yell for him to pull up. The thing leaps off the roof and onto the ground. We're both thinking, whoa, what? My friend is a fancy flyer. He manages to streak to the left, narrowly dodging this thing when it tries to jump onto the helicopter. It's screaming again, writhing in the snow. Once we take off, I grab my night binoculars and I see this thing running after us. Obviously it can't keep up and it eventually stops. It just stares up until I can't see it anymore. I get back to base and I tell everyone. My friend won't. Nobody believes us, of course, but when the cabin guy is better, he starts talking. He says that the thing didn't smash down the door or jump through the window. It unlocked the door by itself and crept in. The thing had been stalking him and was in the cabin looking for him. He heard his door open and looked to see this humanoid thing staring at him. He kept his eyes on it and was able to dial 911 and try to get his gun before it knocked him out. He says he woke up when it was dragging him outside and we showed up. Very shortly after that, I put in a request to move to a different base, and so does my friend. I do everything in my power never to go back to that base in northern Alberta. And if you're at all curious, it was a Cormorant helicopter. So, Alberta can be a crazy place, can't it? If you had a favorite one, let me know which one it was down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? As always, I have an email in the description. Down there as well is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And of course, there's super thanks on YouTube, and just watching the video helps too. And with that, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.